Very good afternoon. Welcome to the massive online open courses uh, for this particular course, Environment and Development. Uh, I thank you all for enrolling for this particular course. Let us briefly look at some of the themes which we have covered so far in the past 4 weeks. What we intend to do in this particular course is to engage in the theoretical applications and environmental knowledge uh, vis-a-vis sustainable development. And we also try to look into the relationship which exists between the physical environment and the social organizations, particularly the human behavior in the very context of development. So therefore, we also try to engage upon looking at having an overview of environmental ethics, debate and change, and also the very analysis of the interrelationship between environment and development issues and concerns confronting us in the past few decades. So in order to understand these pressing environmental concerns and its impacts on the lives and livelihoods, this particular course, by using certain conceptual frameworks and environmental uh, uh, theories which are propounded by many scholars, uh, attempts to look at the sustainable development initiative and also particularly the community-based natural resource management. So in the first few lectures, we try to familiarize ourselves with some of the concepts and terminologies, and also tries to look at by situating how development in some sense has been implement the environment around us, or in other words, we can say that uh, to what extent development has led to the environmental degradations and destructions. So our argument is also being premised within the notions of sustainable development, which has been put forward by the Berlin report or the World Council on the Environment and Development way back in 1987. So when we talk about the notions of environmentalism, we often engage in looking at how the many of these areas of thought are part of our set of loosely integrated ideas, and some consider uh, an alternative uh, social paradigm which are deeply rooted in the ecological concerns and principles, particularly by urging or by uh, discussing about a different environmentalism altogether. So in pursuit of this, we also try to look at an alternative that is an alternative form of development and also an appropriate technology confronting. So we also will be engaging in the later part of the course, of course, by integrating the notions of religion, science, and sustainable development, and then to what extent religion has influences our notions of environmental thinking by selecting a few of the Asian religions. Now, I have also mentioned somewhere is the possibility, or is there a possibility of going back to our pristine past in order to have a future. So there were also few questions considering this particular alternatives. So what I mean to say by going back for a future is that we need not necessarily, go back to the pre-industrial society, but rather we can in some way, learn from uh, certain traditions of the past, particularly knowledge system, the way in which we, the indigenous peoples particularly engage in understanding or managing the natural resources. So we have actually, a lot to learn from many of these societies, particularly when we, talk about the questions of sustainability, because Western science, to a large extent, has created a boundary or a binary between these forms of knowledge by bifurcating or trying to, uh, draw a binary between nature and ecology. So when we talk about environmentalism cannot be seen in isolation because there are a lot of political and ethical questions which are involved in trying to understand, for instance, to improve and protect the quality of the natural environment, through changes which can be, at times very much harmful in the, future. So we have also engaged in trying to look at the different ways of, perceiving the society, the nature or the natural surrounding around us. So there are different worldview, maybe Western society or maybe in the global north or maybe in the global south. So we have two, different ways of, perceiving the natural environment, that is particularly anthropocentrism and biocentrism. So anthropocentric approaches focuses mainly on the negative effects that the environmental degradation has on the human beings and their interest, which include the interest in, in health, recreations, and quality of life. So therefore, it is often, characterized by a mechanistic approach to the non-human nature in which individuals, creatures, and species have only an instrument value for humans. Or whereas in contrast to this, biocentrism claims that nature has an intrinsic moral worth that does not simply depend on its facial value or usefulness to humans. And it is, in fact, this intrinsic worth that gives rise directly to the obligations to the environment. Humans are therefore morally bound to protect the environment as well as individual creatures and species for their own sake. So in this sense, we can say that biocentric views human beings and other elements of the natural environment, both living and often non-living, as members of a single moral and ecological community. So we have also looked at the various trends of, environmentalism, beginning from the 1960s, which is considered as the new environmentalism. And because prior to the 1960s, environmentalism focuses more on the preservations of wilderness and conservations of resources. So the environmental movement, which began to flourish from the 1960s, in the midst of, the civil rights, peace and women's movement. So the works of Rachel Carson's, that is The Silent Spring, which was published in 1962, has been a benchmark and has to a large extent changed the whole notions of our notions of environmental thinking. So therefore, it sort of tries to bring into light the public attention, the dangers of environmental pollutions to public health, such as the use of DDT, and it also sparked the beginning of modern environment. So therefore, one of the overarching theme of Silent Spring is the powerful and often negative effects humans have on the nature. So what Gersons actually tries to argue is that the pesticides and chemicals which are used to kill pests on crops bleed into the environment and affect water sources. So these chemicals are involuntarily ingested by larger creatures when they eat the poison insects. So this phase of environmentalism, that is of the 1960s, what there's a dramatic change in the way in the outlook of people, that people become more aware of the environmental issues such as air and water pollutions, radiations, pesticides, poisoning, and other problems. So they demand that the federal government to take more responsibility. So therefore, there's a public concern of the environment, which became pretty much clear during the Earth Day demonstrations of the 1970s. So therefore, in response to the environmental movement, several laws emerged to regulate the environmental pollutions and also protect the natural sources. So some of the most important laws that was passed and that sort of determine how the, for example, the National Environmental Policy Act and the Federal Water Control Act have to a large extent been understood in this particular regards. So what we can also see is that the emergence of these environmentalism has begun with the period of the notions of American environmentalism. So American environmentalism narratives usually begins with the tales of the wilderness in the West, who tries to look into the destructive practice of mining, overgrazing, timber cutting, and monocrop planting, and various other things. So preservation has to a large extent been one of the frontier ideology of the American people. The notions of the environment as defined in terms of wilderness. So we have a few questions. I'll address those questions in the later part of my discussions. So let me try to wind up these discussions first, and then we'll address the questions. So please bear with me. So the second era of the rise of modern environmentalism differs from the earlier conservation and preservation area in two particular perspectives. The first era tries to emphasize the protections or efficient management of the natural environment, and the primary policy of this modern environmentalism is based on the clean up and the control of pollution. So we could see that moving on from here, the third era, that is the mainstream environmentalism. It began, particularly from the celebrations of the Earth Day in the 1970s, which was widely considered to be the beginning of the third era of American environmentalism, which directly resulted from the infusions of social values of the 1960s into environment. So during the early 1970s, it tries to propagate a new sense of political atmosphere, one which react against the adverse effects of the industrial growth. So therefore, the 1970s again marked the emergence of new issues regarding the toxic chemicals, energy, and the possibilities of the social, economic, and political decentralization. And we also, witnessed the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, and also the passage of variety of environmental laws and policies. And we have again the fourth era, that is the grassroots environmentalism, that is the environmental movement, which has not been practicing one of the laws of nature, strength and diversity, particularly by the works of John Cook that is in environmental cares organization. The grassroots environmentalism embraces the principles of this ecological democracy, and it's distinguished from the mainstream environment by its belief in the citizens' participation in environmental decision making. So we have different varieties of, environmentalism. For instance, uh, uh, the dominant thrust of environmental movement in the north, and also we have, particularly like Mark Du Bois and Meda Patter, which also strongly highlights the cohesions of productions and distributions within the human society. So one of the main thrust of the northern environmentalists was no humanity without nature, and whereas in the southern environmentalists, the main thrust was no nature without social justice. So what we can see is that there is a conflict in terms of these ecological distributions, which particularly focuses on the issues of, for instance, in the environmental movement, particularly in the uh, you know global south, we have seen the livelihood approach, and environmental movement in the third world has possibly been viewed as essentially actions by the marginalized poor to protect their environmental means of livelihood and sustenance. So we could see that there are various, conflicts arises as uh, the case of, say for example, because of the different development initiatives which are being sent, we could see the struggles confronting, within the locals and the corporates, or maybe in a larger picture. So we have also, tried to look at the ecofeminisms, how the ecology or environment is seen from the lens of the feminist thinkers. Particularly, we have choose the works of Carolyn Merchant, uh, uh, Maria Miles, Vandana Shiva, and others such as Melro, which tries to look at the diverse range of the historical analysis of the connections between gender and environment. So we move on to also look at the eco-Marxism, that is where Marx and nature, to a large extent, tries to address the major problems with modern ecological thought that is far too idealistic. So if you look at the works of Marx and Engels' ecology, which is perhaps rooted in their understanding of materialism, or in the assumption that the natural world is the foundations for all that exists. So the physical reality, according to Marxian approach, is that is independent and prior to the thought. So we could also see that we have picked few environmental ethics, and again, the environmental ethics are, you know, uh, limited to what we have tried to cover in this sense. So you please keep posting the questions. I'll get back to you in a while, and let me first try to briefly forward and discuss what we have done so far. So within this, we have picked deep ecology and Gandhian notions of environmentalism and also social ecology. Now, in deep ecology, what we try to do is that it tries from the works of Arne Nest, Norwegian philosopher, which talks about how uh, it does not separate humans or anything else from the natural environment. So therefore, it does see the world not simply as a collections of isolated objects, but as a network of phenomena that are fundamentally interconnected and interdependent. So therefore, deep ecology tries to recognize the intrinsic value of all living beings and views human beings as just one particular strand in the way of life. So it is also interesting to see that although Gandhi might not necessarily claim himself to be an ecologist, but given the works of Gandhi, we could also say that his method of, for example, the uh, non-violence is to a large extent has been deployed by many of the environmental activists, and many of a good number of Indian environmentalists also to a large extent have agreed and acknowledged their debt to Gandhi's ideas. For instance, we have covered that from the Chipko movement to the Safe Narmada movement to the present time. We have seen that many of the environmental activists have, to a large extent, relied on Gandhian techniques of the non-violent protest, or popularly known as the Satyagraha or Gandhigiri. So, which have drawn abundantly on the Gandhi's polemic against heavy industrialization and their struggle for protecting the environment and livelihood to a large extent has been centered around the issues of environment development, survival, sustainability, and peace. So therefore, we can say that many environmentalists today do not merely claim that they are following the examples of Gandhi, but they go on to argue that Gandhi himself foresaw the current ecological crisis confronting us as a consequence of the modern industrial society. So, from many of his work, Hinswarer stand out and also has given us an alternative perspective on development while explaining how the current mode of development is exploitative of man by man and of nature by man. So in social ecology, what we have tried to look at is that the uh, hierarchy which is being created in human society. For instance, the elite class particularly manipulates the natural resources for their own benefits, but only at a substantial cost to the environment and disadvantage social good. So there has always also been a tussle between development and the environment, and it was presumed that industrialization was the major cause for the ecological uh, uh, degradations. So this very term was coined by Murray Bookchin, and it tries to engage in looking at the study of the reciprocal relationship between human society and ecological infrastructure. Now, chat box. This is the chat box, right? But some questions used to pop up, but then it again vanished. So, few questions is that people who belong to the mechanical engineering background uh, uh, have problems with this particular course in the sense how do they go about it. So to be very honest, when if we talk in terms of the applicability or applying this particular course, it might not directly be relevant or maybe at the moment, but definitely if you have uh, discoursed, uh, I'm sure that many of the scholars argue that science and technology alone today does not solve the environmental problems confronting us. Therefore, it is important to have a grassroots knowledge of the people themselves, or in other words, people who are very much in touch with nature or the environment. So therefore, in that sense, in order to have a holistic understanding about the knowledge system, it would be crucial for even when someone from a different background can definitely tries to engage upon it. And some of the queries again was in terms of providing the lecture slides. So I have entrusted my teaching assistants to upload the lecture slides and the readings, which will definitely supplement uh, the, the lectures where there could be sometime a confusion in terms of uh, or I'm not able to explain thoroughly some of the concepts. So therefore, if you please kindly go through the lecture slides and the readings, it definitely help you and supplement your understanding about the courses. So I'm unable to see some of the questions which pop up. So I will also, encourage uh, you to write an email directly to me. So I will try to address your concerns to the possible extent as I can. So what we do is uh, try to again, meet up soon, a couple of weeks, and further try to, interact. And please feel free to address uh, any of your concerns, queries concerning to this course. So thank you. I'll stop here and wish you all the best and uh, good health. Thank you. Done.